The air in Abuja International Airport buzzed with frustration. Rain hammered against the towering glass windows, and lightning danced like fiery veins across the sky. Inside, the terminal gleamed with polished marble and chrome counters, a picture of modern luxury, but all of that luxury was swallowed up by the chaos of irate passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, due to severe weather conditions, all outbound flights are temporarily suspended, echoed the announcement over the intercom. Groans and sighs followed, growing louder with each passing second. Business travelers huddled around customer service counters, arguing with staff. Families gathered their things in a rush, staring at the digital boards flashing the same word over and over: canceled. At Gate 17, Ethan Blackwell, a man of sharp suits and sharper focus, closed his laptop with an audible snap. His green eyes, normally calm and calculated, now burned with frustration. A multi-million-dollar merger was supposed to be his next stop, but here he was, stranded in Abuja, with nothing but uncertainty ahead. His tailored suit remained impeccably crisp despite the warm humidity that had begun to creep through the terminal. Ethan was a man of control. And this? This was chaos. As he scanned the crowded terminal for a way out, his eyes fell on her. Zoe Lancaster. Zoe stood in front of the airline counter, drenched from the rain, her dark hair clinging to her face. She looked like a storm in human form. The fraying patience in her expression was unmistakable. She waved her boarding pass at the clerk with an intensity that caught Ethan's attention. "You can't be serious," Zoe snapped, her voice rising over the ambient noise. "You told me the flight was delayed and now it's canceled? I've been here for over 3 hours already." The airline agent offered a tight smile, her voice apologetic yet strained. "Ma'am, we're doing our best. The storm is affecting flights all over the region." "Your best?" Zoe scoffed, tossing her wet curls back in defiance. "Your best would have been telling me sooner, instead of letting me spend 15,000 naira on snacks." Ethan couldn't help but smirk. He wasn't usually amused by public confrontations, but there was something about Zoe's fiery energy that intrigued him. As she turned abruptly, she almost collided with him, and her phone slipped from her hand. He caught it in midair, reflex sharp, eyes calm. "You should watch where you're going," he said smoothly, returning her phone to her. Zoe arched an eyebrow. "Maybe you shouldn't stand so close," she shot back, her voice playful yet challenging. Their eyes held for a moment, an unspoken spark passing between them before both quickly looked away. Minutes dragged on, and the tension only deepened as they moved closer to the counter together. "Good evening, sir, ma'am," the young woman behind the counter said with forced cheerfulness. "Unfortunately, all flights are grounded until tomorrow. The airline is offering hotel vouchers for the night." "Perfect," Ethan said flatly. "Book me the nearest hotel. Somewhere quiet." Zoe leaned forward quickly. "Same for me," she added. "And I'd like a room with working Wi-Fi and room service." The clerk hesitated, typing rapidly on her computer. Her expression faltered. "I'm so sorry. There's only one room left in our voucher coverage. A deluxe suite with one bed. You can share or wait until morning." Zoe blinked. "One room?" She and Ethan said it at the same time. The clerk nodded apologetically. "Yes, ma'am, sir. You'll have to share the room or wait until tomorrow." Zoe exhaled sharply, glancing out the glass doors to the storm. She hated being stuck, but she wasn't about to sleep in the airport either. "Fine," she muttered, "but I'm taking the bed." "That's negotiable," Ethan replied dryly. The black sedan that arrived to take them to the hotel was sleek, its bright lights cutting through the rain-soaked streets like a beacon of refuge. Inside the Grand Orchid Hotel's lobby, marble floors gleamed under gold chandeliers, and the glass walls reflected the storm still raging outside. Zoe stepped in first, dripping rainwater onto the shiny floors. "Wow," she murmured, spinning slowly. "If we're stranded, at least we're stranded in style." Ethan followed, holding both their vouchers. "It's a hotel, not a vacation," he said flatly. Zoe glanced over her shoulder, offering him a teasing smile. You really don't know how to relax, do you? Ethan didn't smile, but there was something in his eyes that shifted. I just prefer order over chaos. Zoe grinned. And yet, you're stuck with me. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and for a moment, the silence between them felt heavy. Zoe crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently, while Ethan stood with an air of quiet assurance. So, Mr. Blackwell, Zoe began, breaking the silence with a lilt of sarcasm. You're really okay sharing a room with a total stranger? Ethan met her eyes, calm. It's one night. We'll survive. She tilted her head, studying him. You sound so sure. Ethan glanced sideways, his expression softening. I've survived worse flights. As the elevator doors opened to a corridor bathed in golden light, the tension between them felt palpable, and Zoe couldn't shake the feeling that this storm, this night, was only the beginning of something unexpected. As they stepped into the suite, the luxurious space seemed almost too perfect for the chaos that had led them here. The sleek, modern furnishings contrasted with the pounding storm outside. Zoe dropped her bag onto the plush armchair and stretched her arms, taking in the view of the storm through the large floor-to-ceiling windows. Ethan stood by the door, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Neither spoke for a while, the silence almost soothing after the earlier turbulence. But in this strange, shared space, both knew that what happened next would change everything. Their paths had crossed by chance, but sometimes fate has a way of throwing people together when they least expect it. Zoe couldn't deny the pull she felt, and Ethan, despite himself, couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, this storm wasn't the worst thing to have happened. If you believe everyone deserves respect, hit subscribe. Only manipulators and selfish people won't. Are you really one of them? Zoe couldn't deny the pull she felt, and Ethan, despite himself, couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, this storm wasn't the worst thing to have happened. The moment they stepped out of the sedan and into the Grand Orchid Hotel, the contrast between the chaotic night they'd just endured and the sleek, serene luxury of the lobby felt surreal. The hotel was a sanctuary, its soft lighting, gold accents, and marble floors standing in sharp contrast to the storm still raging outside. Zoe stepped inside, her shoes clicking against the polished floors, water dripping from her jacket onto the immaculate carpet. She took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the air soak into her skin, though her mind was still swirling from the bizarre turn of events. Wow, she murmured, spinning slowly to take in the opulence. If we're stranded, at least we're stranded in style. Ethan followed, his face unreadable as his eyes swept over the lobby with a sharp, calculating gaze. He held both their vouchers tightly in one hand, his jaw set in that familiar, controlled way. As usual, he seemed at ease, despite the storm that had hijacked their evening. It's a hotel, not a vacation, Ethan replied, his voice flat. Zoe glanced over her shoulder at him, a mischievous grin playing on her lips. You really don't know how to relax, do you? I prefer order over chaos, he said, his lips curling slightly, though his words carried a hint of truth. Well, lucky for you, Mr. Control, I'm not here to ruin your perfect little schedule, Zoe shot back with a wink. The receptionist greeted them with a smile that barely hid her exhaustion from the evening's chaos. Good evening, sir, ma'am. Unfortunately, we have only one room left under our voucher coverage. It's a deluxe suite, but there's only one bed. You're welcome to share it or wait until morning. Zoe blinked, not sure if she'd heard right. One room? One bed? She looked over at Ethan, whose face remained stoic, though she could tell from his stiff posture that he was none too thrilled with the idea. Zoe raised an eyebrow. You've got to be kidding me. I wish I were, the receptionist replied. But it's either that or wait until the storm clears and we're fully booked. Your choice. Zoe exhaled sharply, glancing out the glass doors at the rain now pouring down harder than before. She hated being trapped, but the idea of spending another minute at the airport didn't seem any better. And as much as she hated to admit it, the hotel room was luxurious enough to make the situation bearable. "Fine," she muttered, rolling her eyes. "I'll take the bed." Ethan didn't flinch. "That's negotiable," he replied dryly, his voice betraying no hint of discomfort, though Zoe could feel the tension radiating from him. The clerk handed over their keycard with a polite nod, and they were ushered toward the elevator. The small space of the elevator felt even smaller with both of them in it. Zoe crossed her arms, tapping her foot impatiently as the silence between them grew heavier. She could almost feel the air thickening with the tension neither one of them wanted to acknowledge. "So," she started, breaking the silence, her voice laced with sarcasm. "You're really okay with this? Sharing a room with a total stranger?" Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "It's one night. We'll survive." Zoe tilted her head, eyeing him carefully. "You sound so sure." "I've survived worse," he replied, though his voice softened slightly. The elevator doors chimed open, and they were guided down a long corridor bathed in soft golden light. The suite waited for them, the polished door standing out like an invitation to what felt like an oddly personal space. Zoe walked in first, setting her suitcase down with a soft thud, her eyes scanning the luxurious room. King-sized bed, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the storm's fury outside, soft lighting creating a peaceful contrast to the wild weather. "Well, at least it's beautiful," she murmured, setting her bag on the chair. Ethan followed, glancing around the room with a critical eye before loosening his tie and shrugging out of his jacket. He moved toward the desk, seemingly trying to distance himself from the situation. "Yes, pity it's temporary," he replied, his tone flat again. Zoe laughed quietly, a genuine, light-hearted sound that filled the room. "Everything temporary has a story," she said softly, meeting his eyes for a brief moment. Ethan paused, his gaze flickering toward her before he let out a breath and turned away. He didn't know why, but Zoe's easygoing attitude somehow put him at ease. Still, that wasn't enough to erase the discomfort of sharing such a personal space with someone he barely knew. After a few moments of standing in awkward silence, Zoe wandered toward the minibar, her fingers lightly brushing the contents. "Well, I don't know about you, but after the day I've had, I could really use a drink." She grinned, popping open a bottle of champagne. "Want to toast to our misfortune?" Ethan looked up from the laptop he had pulled from his briefcase. His gaze softened slightly, a flicker of amusement passing through his otherwise stoic expression. "I don't drink on work nights," he replied, his voice still cool. Zoe raised an eyebrow, holding the bottle in the air like a victory trophy. "You do realize you're technically stranded, right?" She popped the cork with a loud pop, sending it flying across the room, and grinned as it landed harmlessly on the carpet. "No meetings, no deadlines, no rules. Seems like the perfect night to forget who you are, don't you think?" Ethan's lips twitched, but he didn't respond immediately. After a pause, he said, "You talk too much." "Maybe," Zoe teased, "but you think too much." She handed him a glass of champagne anyway. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she couldn't ignore the small spark that shot up her arm. "To the storm," she said, raising her glass. "To surviving it," Ethan replied, clinking his glass gently against hers. The tension that had hung in the air throughout the evening began to soften as they drank. Their conversation started small, travel delays, the absurdity of the flight cancellations, the storm, but slowly, it shifted into more personal territory. "So," Zoe began, her voice laced with curiosity, "Mr. Blackwell, what do you do when you're not glaring at flight schedules?" Ethan sipped his champagne, a wry smile appearing on his lips. "Corporate law," he said, his eyes briefly flickering toward her. "Mostly contracts and negotiations." Zoe tilted her head, considering this. You don't look like someone who loves paperwork. I don't, Ethan admitted, his voice flat. But I'm good at it. And being good is enough for you? Zoe asked, raising an eyebrow. There was a depth in her voice that made Ethan pause for a moment. Her question unexpectedly thoughtful. It's stable, he said after a long pause, his words careful. Predictable. Zoe's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Predictable is another word for boring. She leaned back in her chair, gazing out the window at the storm. You prefer instability, huh? I prefer living, she said, her voice soft. Feeling, messing up, finding beauty in accidents. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, caught off guard by the honesty in her words. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, as though something deep inside him was awakened. As the night wore on, the rain softened into a gentle drizzle, the tension between them lingering in the air, unspoken but felt. It was clear to both of them that the evening was far from ordinary, and that despite their differences, something was beginning to form between them, something neither of them could ignore. After a long evening of trying, unsuccessfully, to ignore the undeniable chemistry between them, Ethan and Zoe found themselves sitting near the large window of the hotel suite. The storm had passed, and the soft, cool drizzle outside seemed to mirror the gentle calm settling in the room. It had been a strange night. The sharp edges of their differences had softened, and the humor and sarcasm that had initially defined their exchanges had given way to something far more vulnerable. Zoe leaned back in her chair, her fingers lightly brushing the condensation on the glass, her gaze drifting outside as she let the quiet linger between them. Ethan was at the desk, his laptop open in front of him, but the screen was barely registering. He was, for the first time in a long while, completely distracted. Despite the chaos of the evening, the storm outside, and the way Zoe's presence had filled the room, his mind couldn't seem to shake her. Zoe glanced over at him. She hadn't meant to be curious, hadn't planned on prying into the life of the man she barely knew, but something about him intrigued her. How he carried himself, how he tried to remain distant, but the vulnerability in his eyes tonight made her wonder what drove him. So, she began, her voice breaking the silence. You're not the typical businessman, are you? Ethan's fingers paused mid-keyboard. He looked up at her, his expression guarded. Define typical, he replied, his voice smooth but distant. Zoe smiled. Well, for one, you're not running around shouting orders at people. I half expected you to have a secretary trailing behind you, passing out schedules and making sure everything went according to plan. Ethan's lips twitched in the faintest of smiles, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of the man behind the business persona. I don't like chaos, if that's what you mean. I like things under control. Zoe leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees as she turned to face him. But control can get exhausting, can't it? All that planning, all that effort to keep everything in line. Doesn't it make life feel predictable? Like you've already lived it all before? Ethan stared at her for a long moment, and for the first time that night, he didn't hide his thoughts. It can, he admitted softly. But it's also easier. When you know what's coming next, you can prepare. You can anticipate. It's safer that way. Zoe's smile faded slightly as she considered his words. And what happens when you can't prepare? When life throws a curveball? Ethan's gaze shifted to the window, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked out at the rain-soaked city. I don't like surprises, he muttered. Zoe tilted her head. But sometimes, surprises are the best part. When something unexpected happens, and it forces you to see things differently. I think we spend so much time planning and controlling that we forget to let life just happen. The silence that followed stretched between them, each of them reflecting on the words that had just passed between them. Zoe, with her free-spirited approach to life, and Ethan, with his need for order and structure, found themselves caught somewhere in between. "So," Zoe said, breaking the silence again, "what's the real story behind Ethan Blackwell? The one that doesn't involve mergers and contracts?" Ethan shifted slightly in his chair, his posture rigid. "The real story?" he repeated. He wasn't used to being asked that question, wasn't used to people wanting to know more than just the polished version of himself. He'd spent so many years building up the image, maintaining the distance, that the thought of someone wanting to dig deeper felt foreign. But something in Zoe's gaze made him pause, made him reconsider. Maybe it was the vulnerability she had shown, or maybe it was the strange pull he felt toward her, but he decided to answer. "I grew up with nothing," Ethan said slowly, his voice taking on a faraway quality. "My father was a single parent. He worked long hours, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs just to keep us afloat. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And he taught me early on that nothing in life is free. You work for everything you get. You earn it." Zoe nodded slowly, her gaze softening. "And you built Blackwell Enterprises from that?" Ethan gave a dry laugh. "Not exactly. I worked my way up from the bottom, but it wasn't just about the company. It was about proving I could do it on my own. Proving that I wasn't just my father's son, that I could be someone." Zoe studied him for a moment. "That sounds like a lot of pressure." "It was," Ethan admitted, his tone quiet. "But it's also what I've known. And the more success I've had, the harder it's become to let go of that pressure. To admit that maybe I don't have to carry it all alone." There was a long pause, the weight of his words settling between them. Zoe's gaze softened even more as she leaned in, her voice gentle. "Ethan, you don't have to do everything alone. You're allowed to need people, to trust them." The sincerity in her voice tugged at something inside of him. Ethan's lips parted slightly, but he didn't know how to respond. He was still holding back, still unsure whether he could let someone in, even someone as different as Zoe. Zoe, sensing the hesitation, shifted her position, moving a little closer. "And what about you?" he asked, his voice low. "What drives you?" Zoe looked away for a moment, the weight of the question catching her off guard. She wasn't used to being so open, especially not with someone she barely knew. But for some reason, Ethan's presence made it easier. "I left a stable job to pursue my dream," she said quietly. "I wanted to do something I loved, something that mattered to me. But it's not easy, and it's lonely sometimes." Ethan watched her carefully, seeing the cracks in her confident exterior. "Loneliness?" he asked, his voice softer now. "I thought you didn't mind chaos." "I don't mind chaos," she said, meeting his eyes. "But I do mind feeling like I'm doing it all on my own." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was charged with something unspoken, something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Zoe found herself leaning in ever so slightly, and before she could stop herself, Ethan did the same. Their eyes locked, the distance between them shrinking until there was nothing left but the feeling of anticipation. Just as their lips were about to meet, the lights flickered. The power in the room shut down completely, leaving them in complete darkness. The silence was deafening. The moment had shattered. Both of them leaned back, frustration and confusion swirling in the air. "Of course," Zoe muttered, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Why am I not surprised?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling deeply. "Seems like the universe doesn't want us to finish this conversation." Neither of them spoke for a while, the tension hanging in the air, thick and uncomfortable. Despite the darkness, they both knew what had just happened. Neither of them was ready to confront it, but the charge between them was undeniable. The storm outside had calmed, but the one brewing between them was far from over. The first light of dawn crept through the thin curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. Zoe stirred under the covers, her eyes fluttering open to the quiet hum of the hotel room, but she immediately stiffened as she registered the silence. An all-encompassing silence, one that felt awkward and unfamiliar. Ethan wasn't there. Her breath caught for a moment, an odd emptiness lingering in the space where his presence had been just hours ago. The events of the night before felt like a blur, a whirlwind of conversations and glances, and then the unexpected interruption. She glanced toward the other side of the bed. The second pillow was untouched, the sheets undisturbed. He'd left before she woke. The familiar coolness of the room, now bathed in the light of the morning, made her feel more alone than the storm outside ever had. Zoe pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, trying to shake off the strange sense of disappointment that clung to her chest. Maybe it was for the best. Maybe last night had been nothing more than a momentary spark, one that had fizzled out the moment the lights went off. But she couldn't deny the truth. The chemistry was still there. The pull between them hadn't gone anywhere, despite the awkwardness of the night, the broken moment. Maybe it was better that they didn't finish it. Maybe... The sound of a door opening broke her thoughts. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his suit perfectly pressed, his tie knotted with the same precision he always carried, as though the events of the night before had never happened. "Morning," he said quietly, not quite meeting her gaze, as if still unsure of how to approach her after everything that had unfolded. Zoe sat up, trying to gather herself. "Morning," she replied, her voice low. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence almost louder than the storm that had passed. Zoe stared at him, her eyes flicking to his face, noting the lines of fatigue under his eyes, the way his jaw clenched as he scanned the room. She could tell he was uncomfortable, just as she was. It was as if neither of them knew what to say. For a brief moment they just stood there, in that strange limbo. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, they both began to move, preparing to leave. Ethan made his way to the desk, gathering his things with methodical precision, while Zoe picked up her bag, feeling the weight of the morning settle in. "I have to go," she said finally, her voice more confident than she felt. "I have a pitch this morning." "I'm sure you have your own things to do." Ethan nodded without looking up, his fingers still moving over his briefcase. "Yes, I do," he said, his tone clipped. "I'm headed to Paris later. There's a meeting I can't miss." Zoe could sense the distance between them, and though part of her longed for the familiarity of their earlier conversations, she couldn't help but feel like they were both retreating into their roles, distancing themselves from the brief connection they had shared. She glanced at him once more before walking to the door. "Well, good luck with your meeting, Mr. Blackwell." He glanced up then, his eyes meeting hers for a split second. "Same to you, Ms. Lancaster." The door clicked shut behind her with a soft finality, leaving her alone in the hallway, her thoughts swirling. It wasn't until she was in the lobby, waiting for a cab, that she received the call that made her stop in her tracks. "Ms. Lancaster?" the voice on the other end said. "We've just been informed that your firm has been selected for a major partnership with Blackwell Enterprises. The pitch for the new marketing strategy will be presented to the board next week. Congratulations." Zoe froze. The blood drained from her face. "Blackwell Enterprises?" she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. She couldn't believe it. The company she'd just heard Ethan mention, the company he ran, was now going to be working with her. "You'll be receiving further details shortly," the voice continued. "We'll need your confirmation on the proposal before the meeting next week. Looking forward to working with you." The phone call ended, but Zoe didn't move. She just stood there in the hotel lobby, trying to process the information. This was it. The man she had shared a hotel room with, the man she had nearly kissed just hours ago, was not just some businessman. He was the businessman. And now their professional worlds were about to collide. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, and suddenly the storm from the night before seemed trivial. This was a whole new storm, and it wasn't one she was ready for. Back in the hotel room, Ethan stood staring out of the window, his mind replaying everything. The conversation, the moments of vulnerability, and that almost kiss. Despite his usual detachment, something about the night kept pulling at him. It wasn't just the attraction to Zoe, though that was undeniable. It was the fact that, for the first time in a long time, he felt like someone had seen past the polished surface he'd carefully built. The storm had cleared, but he was still left with the emotional remnants of the night. His assistant called, bringing him back to reality. "Sir, the meeting in Paris is scheduled. We'll need to leave soon to make it on time." Ethan nodded absently. "I'll be there shortly," he replied, though his mind was far from the business he had to attend to. Instead, his thoughts kept drifting back to Zoe. Why couldn't he shake the feeling that their paths were somehow intertwined in a way he hadn't expected? The morning passed quickly for both of them, the weight of what had happened still hanging between them like an unspoken question. Zoe had never been one to let her emotions control her, but today, they were inescapable. As the elevator doors opened, she found herself standing in front of the conference room, her heart pounding. It was only when she stepped inside, when her eyes scanned the room and landed on Ethan, standing at the head of the table, the very picture of professionalism, that the gravity of the situation hit her. He wasn't just a businessman. He was the man she had shared a night with. And now, here he was again, the CEO of Blackwell Enterprises, ready to judge her and her proposal. She swallowed hard, trying to push away the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The storm had passed, but their storm was only beginning. Zoe could feel her pulse quicken as she stood at the entrance of the sleek conference room, her palms slightly damp with nervousness. This wasn't just any presentation. No, this time the stakes were higher. Blackwell Enterprises, the company she had never imagined she'd be connected to, was now part of her reality. And Ethan? He was the heart of it. The man she had shared a hotel room with the night before. The man whose sharp eyes now scanned the room with the same intensity that had made her heart race in that room just hours ago. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The room was a polished corporate battleground, its glass walls reflecting the world outside, making the space feel almost like an arena. She forced a smile, adjusting the strap of her bag as she crossed the room toward the head of the table where Ethan sat, flanked by a few senior executives. "Ms. Lancaster," Ethan greeted her coolly, his gaze sharp, but there was something else in his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. "Please, take a seat." The tension between them was palpable. Despite his composed demeanor, Zoe could sense the undercurrent of something unresolved, something still lingering from the night they'd shared. She sat, careful to keep her posture professional, though inside, her mind was swirling with all the things unsaid between them. The meeting began, and for the first few minutes it was all business, discussions about the marketing campaign, numbers, projections, and timelines. Ethan's voice was steady, authoritative, his presence commanding respect from the boardroom. He was every inch the CEO, confident and calculated. But with each word, Zoe couldn't help but feel the gap between their personal connection and this professional facade. She had to push aside the memory of their intimate conversations, of the almost kiss that had been so abruptly interrupted, and focus on the task at hand. Then, it was her turn. Zoe stood, walking to the projector to present her ideas. The first few slides were standard, market research, strategy, and consumer insights. But as she spoke about the creative vision for the project, she felt the weight of Ethan's gaze on her. His eyes were locked on her, his usual detachment replaced by something softer, something personal. Zoe could feel the tension crackling in the air, the connection between them almost palpable even in a room full of people. Every time she glanced at him, her heart seemed to skip a beat. She had to focus, had to ignore the tug of emotions threatening to derail her. "As you can see," Zoe continued, clicking through the next set of slides, "the campaign is designed to highlight not just the brand, but the values it represents: innovation, trust, and quality. This is more than just a marketing initiative. It's an opportunity to redefine the relationship between Blackwell Enterprises and the consumer. We're not just selling a product, we're selling an experience, a vision of the future. The board members seemed impressed, murmuring among themselves. Zoe could see Ethan watching her closely, his lips pressed together in concentration. For a moment, the business part of her took over completely, and she felt the confidence that had guided her decision to leave her stable job and pursue this career. She was good at this, creative, innovative, and willing to take risks. "Impressive," Ethan said after a moment, his tone measured but not without a hint of admiration. "I like the direction, but what about the implementation? What challenges do you foresee?" Zoe paused, then smiled. "There are always challenges when you're pushing boundaries, but with the right strategy, we can mitigate those risks and ensure that the campaign resonates with the audience in a way that is both authentic and impactful. It's not just about flashy advertisements, it's about creating a lasting impression." The conversation shifted to more technical aspects of the project, but the moment was not lost on either of them. Zoe could see it in Ethan's eyes. He was impressed. She had done it. The creative vision, the strategy, everything was landing. Despite the awkwardness of their personal dynamic, she had proven herself. When the meeting ended, there was a polite round of applause from the board. Zoe gave a small nod of thanks, her heart still pounding in her chest from the adrenaline of the presentation. But when her eyes met Ethan's across the table, the unspoken tension was undeniable. She quickly turned away, gathering her things and moving toward the exit. "Ms. Lancaster," Ethan's voice stopped her before she could leave the room. She turned to face him, her pulse still racing. "I think we'll be moving forward with your proposal." The words should have felt like a victory, and in some ways, they were. But in that moment, all she could feel was the weight of his gaze, the lingering connection between them that seemed to transcend the business transaction. "Thank you," Zoe said, her voice steady. "I look forward to working with you." As she turned to leave, she couldn't help but feel like they were both walking a fine line. Professionally, yes, but also personally. The night they'd spent together, the chemistry they shared, it was all still there, like an invisible thread pulling them together. And yet they both knew it couldn't, shouldn't happen. Not here, not now. Later that evening, Zoe found herself sitting in a quiet corner of a cafe near her apartment, her laptop open but forgotten. Her mind kept wandering back to Ethan, to their interactions that day, to the connection they shared. She knew she couldn't let it distract her. There was still too much at stake, too much riding on this project, on her career. Her phone buzzed, dragging her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her best friend. "How did the pitch go? I need all the details." Zoe smiled softly, her fingers typing a quick response. "It went well, better than I expected. Blackwell Enterprises is moving forward with us." Her friend's response came almost immediately. "That's huge! You're one step closer to taking over the world." Zoe laughed softly to herself, feeling a sense of pride swell in her chest. But even as she typed out her reply, a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had come at the cost of something else. And as she glanced at her phone again, another message popped up, a notification from her email. The subject line was simple: Blackwell Enterprises, Partnership Details. Zoe hesitated for a moment before clicking on it. When the email opened, her heart skipped a beat. The partnership wasn't just with the marketing division of Blackwell Enterprises, it was with Ethan Blackwell himself. Zoe's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. And the pull she felt toward him? It was only going to get stronger from here. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in his office, staring out over the city skyline. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, and none of them had to do with the meeting in Paris that was fast approaching. Instead, his thoughts kept returning to Zoe, her presentation, her confidence, the way she had held his gaze as she spoke. It was unprofessional, he knew that. But the more he tried to push it away, the more it lingered. He had spent years building his career, maintaining control, keeping everything neatly in line. But somehow, with Zoe, he couldn't seem to follow the rules. With a sigh, he rubbed his temples, trying to focus. He had work to do, after all. But his mind kept returning to the same place. Her eyes, her voice, that spark between them that neither of them seemed willing to fully acknowledge. "I need to get back to work," he muttered to himself, trying to shake off the distraction. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had, in one night, turned his carefully constructed world upside down. As the night drew to a close, both Ethan and Zoe found themselves caught in the same storm. Different storms, of course. Zoe with her excitement about the project, and Ethan with his unresolved feelings. Neither could shake the pull between them, but neither knew how to act on it. Their professional worlds were colliding, and in a way, it felt like the beginning of something neither of them were ready to face. 2 weeks had passed since that unforgettable night at the hotel. Since then, Ethan and Zoe had been navigating their professional worlds with the kind of strained politeness that comes when two people share a secret. Except, of course, the secret between them wasn't really one at all. They both knew the tension was there, but neither of them had dared to acknowledge it. Ethan was in Paris, then New York, his schedule packed with meetings, deals, and boardroom pressures. Zoe had thrown herself into her work with equal fervor. Despite the unspoken connection between them, she couldn't afford to let it get in the way of her goals. This partnership with Blackwell Enterprises was her big break, the one that could push her marketing firm into the upper echelons of the business world. But despite their best efforts to remain strictly professional, the distance between them was filled with a magnetic force that neither of them could ignore. They exchanged emails, occasional texts, and brief meetings. But each interaction seemed to carry an undercurrent of something more, a subtle tension that built with every passing day. Today, Zoe had arranged to meet Ethan for coffee. A quick business discussion, she'd told herself. Nothing more. But as she arrived at the cafe, her stomach twisted with nervous anticipation. The cafe was quiet, tucked away from the bustling street outside, a place where she could get lost in the moment, away from the pressures of work. But no matter how she tried to prepare herself, she couldn't shake the thought that this meeting could change everything. When Ethan arrived, he was dressed in a tailored gray coat, his usual confidence in every step. He looked even more polished than she remembered, his presence filling the room the way it always did. For a moment, Zoe simply stared at him, her heart beating a little faster than it should have. "Ms. Lancaster," Ethan greeted her smoothly, offering her a small, somewhat distant smile as he sat across from her. "Mr. Blackwell," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I trust your trip to Paris went well?" "It did," Ethan answered, his tone professional but his eyes lingering on her face longer than necessary. "But I'm glad to be back. This project is moving quickly. It's important, after all." Zoe nodded, watching him carefully. She knew they weren't just talking about the project anymore. They were talking about something else, something that neither of them had been willing to face. But now, as she looked at him, she could feel the shift in the air between them. The electricity was there, undeniable. "I'm glad you're back too," Zoe said softly, her voice almost hesitant. "The project's going well on our end too. We've made some key adjustments to the campaign strategy that should increase engagement in the first quarter." Ethan's eyes softened slightly as he listened to her speak, though his expression remained neutral. "I'm sure your team has done great work. But you've impressed me, Zoe. The way you think outside the box. It's rare to find someone who challenges the norm as you do." Zoe felt a warmth rise in her chest at his words, a mix of pride and something else. Something deeper. She couldn't ignore the effect he had on her, the way his approval seemed to matter more than it should. "Thank you," she replied, her tone warmer now. "But we wouldn't be here without the opportunity you gave us. Blackwell Enterprises is a big deal. and being a part of it feels like everything is finally coming together. Ethan studied her for a moment, his gaze flickering with something unreadable. Then, as if pulled by some invisible force, he leaned forward slightly. You know, I've been thinking about that night. The hotel room, the storm. You caught me off guard, Zoe. Zoe's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected him to bring it up, not here, not now. But the words were out, and the tension in the air thickened. She took a deep breath, feeling her pulse race. I've been thinking about it too. But it's complicated, Ethan. We're working together now. And... I know, Ethan interrupted, his voice low. But that night... I haven't been able to shake it. It wasn't just the storm. It wasn't just the circumstances. It was... you. Zoe swallowed, her throat dry. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear this. She wasn't sure if she was ready to admit that, despite everything, a part of her had been waiting for him to say something, to break the silence between them. I don't know what this is, Ethan, she said, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable. I didn't come here to talk about what happened that night. I came here to talk about the project, about Blackwell Enterprises and the work we're doing together. Ethan's gaze softened, and for a moment she saw something in his eyes, a flash of something raw, something real. He wasn't just the powerful CEO she had spent weeks trying to impress. He was human, just like her. I know, he said, his voice low. But sometimes, the personal and professional worlds collide, and when they do, you have to decide which one you'll let guide you. The truth is, I've never let anything get in the way of my work. But with you, I'm not so sure anymore. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was deafening, charged with everything they hadn't said. Zoe's heart hammered in her chest, and she had to remind herself to breathe. I don't know what to do with this feeling, Ethan, Zoe admitted softly, looking away for a moment as her fingers fiddled with the edge of her coffee cup. I've spent my whole life focusing on my career, and now, suddenly, I don't know what's going on with us. Ethan nodded slowly, understanding. I get it. I do. But I can't help how I feel, Zoe. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The conversation that had begun as professional had shifted into something more. It was no longer about the project, no longer about the business pitch they had presented together. It was about the connection they shared, the undeniable pull that had been there from the very beginning. Before either of them could say another word, the door to the cafe opened, and in walked a group of people, an interruption that neither of them welcomed. The moment between them was shattered, leaving behind only the weight of unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. Ethan stood first, his hand tightening around his coffee cup as he turned toward Zoe. I think we need to take a step back, he said, his voice even but conflicted. We're not there yet. Zoe nodded, though her chest felt heavy. I agree. But even as she spoke the words, she knew it wasn't over. The pull between them was stronger than ever. As they parted ways, neither of them spoke about what had transpired. The conversation was over, for now. But deep down, both of them knew this was far from finished. The days after their coffee meeting were filled with a delicate balance between the professional and personal, each one teetering on the edge of something neither of them could fully define. Ethan and Zoe continued to meet for business discussions, but the distance between them had shifted. The electric tension that once hummed quietly beneath the surface had become more undeniable, more palpable. And though they both tried to ignore it, their minds were filled with thoughts of the other, unspoken words and shared moments that neither could easily forget. Zoe was sitting in her office one afternoon when her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. Can we meet for dinner? I think it's time we address what's been building between us." The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that Zoe felt deep in her chest. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she hesitated. They hadn't talked about the night they shared, or the unspoken feelings that lingered in the air between them. But as much as she tried to convince herself to focus on work, the pull toward him was undeniable. "You can't ignore this forever," she thought, staring at the message. After a brief moment of hesitation, she typed back, "Dinner sounds good. Let's meet at 7. When Zoe arrived at the restaurant, a quiet but elegant bistro tucked away in the city's heart, her nerves were on edge. She had worn a simple dress, classic, understated, but her mind was still racing. What was going to happen tonight? Could they really ignore the chemistry between them any longer? Ethan was already there when she walked in, sitting at a table near the window, his usual calm demeanor still present, though there was a slight shift in his posture. He stood up as she approached, a soft smile curving his lips. "Zoe," he greeted, his voice low and warm. "You look stunning." She smiled, though she couldn't quite stop the rush of warmth that spread through her chest at his words. "Thanks, Ethan. You look like you always do. Like you just walked out of a magazine." He chuckled, his eyes lighting up. "I should take that as a compliment, I suppose." They both sat, and for a moment, the conversation started as it always had. Casual, professional, nothing too personal. They spoke about the project, about Blackwell Enterprises' upcoming initiatives, but both of them knew that this wasn't why they were here. There was something else in the air, something deeper, and neither of them was willing to let it stay buried any longer. "So," Zoe began, breaking the silence as the waiter brought over their drinks. "You wanted to talk about what's been building between us." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm assuming you don't mean the project?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression softening slightly. "No," he said quietly, his voice lower than usual. "I don't mean the project." Zoe's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to open up so quickly, and it unnerved her more than she cared to admit. She had spent weeks trying to keep things professional, trying to ignore the way her body reacted to his presence, to the way her thoughts constantly strayed to him. "I can't stop thinking about that night," Ethan continued, his voice steady but tinged with something more vulnerable than she had heard from him before. "About the way everything seemed to fall away. It felt different with you, and I don't know how to explain it." Zoe's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding a little faster. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this conversation, but the honesty in Ethan's eyes made it impossible to look away. "Ethan," she began softly, her voice laced with hesitation. "I'm not sure what to say. We're both here to work, to build something. I don't want to complicate that. But I can't lie. I felt it too." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Then what do we do about it, Zoe? How do we keep pretending it's not there? Because the truth is, I'm tired of pretending. I don't want to keep fighting this pull between us." Her pulse raced, the air between them thick with unspoken desire. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She wanted to walk away from it, wanted to pretend it didn't matter, but the truth was that it did. It mattered more than she wanted to admit. The chemistry, the attraction, it was undeniable, and no matter how much she tried to bury it, it kept coming back to the surface. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm ready to let this be more than just what it is. This project, Blackwell Enterprises, everything. It's a lot. I can't let my personal feelings cloud that." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "I understand. I really do. But I also think we're both fooling ourselves if we think we can ignore this forever." Zoe sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Maybe you're right. But that doesn't make it easier. We've both worked so hard to get to where we are, Ethan. I don't want to lose sight of that." There was a long pause, the weight of the conversation settling between them. The waiter came and went, setting down their meal, but neither of them touched their plates right away. The words they had spoken hung in the air, unresolved, still waiting for a conclusion neither of them was quite ready to make. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm not asking you to throw everything away, Zoe. I'm asking you to give us a chance, to see where this could go, whatever this is. Maybe we don't have the answers right now, but I believe we owe it to ourselves to explore this, to see where it leads." Zoe felt her heart race, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't sure what it was, his words, the sincerity in his eyes, or the pull between them that had only grown stronger. But for the first time since they'd met, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they didn't have to choose between their careers and their connection. Maybe they could have both. "All right," she said softly, her voice steady now. "Let's see where this goes." Ethan's expression softened, his eyes lighting up with a smile. "I'm glad you're willing to take that step with me." The rest of the evening passed in a comfortable quiet, their conversation no longer about the project or their careers, but about each other. They shared stories, their walls slowly coming down with each passing moment. Zoe laughed, genuinely, for the first time in days, and Ethan found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. The guarded CEO was still there, but something in him had shifted. When the evening came to an end, neither of them wanted to say goodbye. But they knew they had to. As they stepped outside into the cool evening air, Ethan walked her to her car, his hand brushing hers in a touch that felt both natural and electrifying. "I'll see you soon?" he asked, his voice low. Zoe nodded, her heart racing. "I'm looking forward to it." With a final lingering look, they parted ways, knowing that this wasn't the end, but rather the beginning of something neither of them could quite predict. As Zoe drove away, she couldn't help but smile to herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the brink of something amazing. Something worth the risk. And Ethan? He watched her car disappear into the night, a quiet certainty settling in his chest. He had made the right choice. Now, he just had to prove it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, presentations, and the growing tension between the professional and personal lives that Zoe and Ethan were trying and failing to separate. Each encounter, whether planned or accidental, seemed to draw them closer together, but with that closeness came inevitable complications. They could no longer ignore the attraction that sizzled between them, nor could they deny the impact it had on their work. Zoe found herself staying up late into the night, her laptop open but abandoned as her thoughts drifted to Ethan. She had promised herself that she wouldn't mix business with pleasure, but the lines were becoming increasingly blurry. Every text, every phone call, every shared moment felt like a promise of something more, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. And yet, she couldn't stay away. Her firm's collaboration with Blackwell Enterprises had deepened, and with each passing day, she found herself more involved in the projects, more tangled in the web of her connection with Ethan. The intimacy they had begun to explore on a personal level was now bleeding into their professional lives, and while the collaboration between them had been productive, it was also becoming increasingly difficult to separate their feelings from their work. Zoe sat at her desk, her phone buzzing with a message from Ethan. She had just finished finalizing her marketing proposal, a project she knew could be the turning point for both their companies. But her mind was elsewhere, on him. Every interaction, every glance exchanged between them seemed to carry a weight she couldn't shake off. "Are we still on for tonight?" She stared at the message for a moment before replying. "I thought you'd forgotten. You know we can't be late for the meeting tomorrow." She set her phone down and returned to her work, trying to focus, but her mind wouldn't allow it. The pull toward him, the unspoken tension, was impossible to ignore. And the more she tried to bury it, the more she found herself drawn to him. The phone buzzed again, this time with a photo of a fancy dinner reservation. Ethan had taken the liberty of booking them a table at a luxurious rooftop restaurant in the city, an unmistakable gesture of the kind of control he had over every aspect of his life. And yet, she couldn't help but smile at the thought of their evening together. "I'll be there. Don't worry about the meeting. It's not the work I'm thinking about tonight." Her heart skipped a beat as she read his words. For a moment she wondered if they were both making a mistake. But as she sat there, staring at the glowing screen, she realized that she no longer cared. The work was important, yes, but there was something about Ethan, a raw, unspoken bond, that was starting to mean more. That evening, as they arrived at the restaurant, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The city stretched out below them, the sparkling lights reflecting in the windows, but inside, it was as if time slowed down. Ethan had chosen a corner table with a view of the skyline, and as they sat down, the tension between them felt electric, charged with unspoken words. "I've been thinking about us," Ethan said, his voice low as he leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. His eyes locked with hers, an intensity in them that made Zoe's pulse race. "Us?" Zoe asked, her voice quieter than she intended. She leaned in too, not able to stop herself. "You're not thinking we can keep pretending this is just business, are you?" Ethan's lips curved into a small smile, but his eyes were serious. "I'm not pretending anymore. I want to see where this goes, Zoe. But I can't lie. I'm starting to think about things outside of work. About us. About how complicated this is." Zoe exhaled slowly, a knot forming in her stomach. "We both knew it was complicated from the start," she said. "But that doesn't make it easier. We're talking about crossing lines that we can't uncross. Not in business, not in life." Ethan reached for his glass, his fingers brushing hers briefly, sending a jolt of electricity through her. His gaze softened as he looked at her, almost as though he could see through her carefully constructed defenses. "I know," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "But maybe we need to take the risk, Zoe. I'm not asking you to jump in with both feet, but I want to know if this, what we have, is real. I don't want to walk away from something that could be something important." Zoe's breath caught in her throat. The words hung in the air between them. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to truly feel everything she had been trying to ignore. The tension, the spark, the undeniable chemistry. It was all there, all too real to deny any longer. "I can't do this halfway," Zoe said, her voice shaking slightly. "Either we do this fully, or we don't do it at all. I'm not in a place where I can risk my career, my dreams, or my heart for something that might end in disappointment." Ethan leaned back, studying her face, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the silence between them felt suffocating, and Zoe felt her chest tighten with uncertainty. Was she being too careful? Too cautious? But then, slowly, he nodded. "I understand," he said, "and I respect that. But I don't want to walk away from this without knowing if we can make it work. I won't push you, Zoe. But I won't pretend either." Zoe stared at him for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She could feel the conflict rising inside her, torn between her desire to give in to the connection between them and her need to maintain control over her life and career. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted softly, her eyes meeting his. "I don't know if I'm ready to risk everything for something that might not work out." Ethan reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. The touch was warm, grounding, and for a moment, Zoe felt her resistance crack. "You don't have to make that decision right now," he said quietly. "But let's not keep pretending like there's nothing between us." Zoe met his gaze, and for the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. the truth that she had been hiding from for too long.
"Maybe we don't need to pretend anymore,"
she whispered. As they sat there, their hands intertwined across the table, the weight of their words hung between them. The tension had shifted, no longer a battle to keep their feelings at bay, but an unspoken understanding that something had changed. Something that neither of them could ignore, no matter how hard they tried. But as the evening wore on, the reality of their situation began to settle in. The world outside their little bubble was still there, still full of expectations, responsibilities, and pressures. And though the connection between them was undeniable, Zoe couldn't ignore the fact that they were both standing on the edge of a precipice. The dinner ended with quiet conversation, each of them lost in their thoughts. As they left the restaurant, the cool night air hit them both, but it did little to shake the warmth that lingered between them. They walked in silence to the car, the city lights flashing around them, neither of them willing to speak the words that were left unsaid. The storm of emotions that had been building between them for weeks was still there, unacknowledged, but it was no longer something they could ignore. As Zoe got into the car and drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something big, something that could either break them or bind them together for good. The question was, could they survive the pressure of their worlds colliding, or would it be too much for them to handle? For now, the answer was uncertain. But one thing was for sure. Their story was just beginning. The days after their dinner were filled with a kind of quiet anticipation. Ethan and Zoe had agreed to take things slowly, to let their connection grow without the weight of expectations. But despite their efforts to keep their relationship on a measured, professional track, the pull between them remained strong, unavoidable, magnetic. Zoe, ever the pragmatic one, couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. She had been burned before, and the risk of letting herself fall too deeply, too fast, terrified her. But every time she saw Ethan, every time they shared a conversation, whether it was about work or something far more personal, she felt herself falling further. She couldn't help it. There was something about him, something in the way he saw her, the way he understood her ambition, but also challenged her to see beyond it. The morning after their dinner, Ethan sent her a text, a simple message that made her heart skip a beat. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night. I want to make this work, Zoe. Let's not rush, but let's also not hold back. If we're doing this, let's do it fully." Zoe sat with her coffee, reading the message several times. He had a way of putting everything into words, making the mess of emotions between them seem manageable. The simplicity of his offer made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had been overthinking it all along. Her fingers hovered over the phone screen as she typed her reply. "Okay, let's see where this goes." A week later, Ethan and Zoe found themselves facing the reality of what they had begun. The professional side of their lives continued as usual. Meetings, deals, projects. But now, there was something else in the air between them. Something personal. They had started spending more time together outside of work. Long dinners, spontaneous walks through the city, late-night talks that made Zoe feel like she was uncovering a new layer of Ethan. She wasn't the only one feeling it. Ethan was starting to open up to her in ways that surprised him. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of his penthouse, the skyline of the city sparkling in the distance, Ethan turned to Zoe, his expression more serious than usual. "I've been thinking about this. About us," he said, his voice low. "We've been playing it safe, but I don't want to play games anymore. You're not just another business deal to me, Zoe. You never were." Zoe looked at him, her heart beating faster. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability that he usually kept hidden behind a wall of confidence. It was a side of him she hadn't seen before, and it made her heart ache in the best way possible. "I'm not playing games either," she replied softly. "But I've spent so much of my life focusing on my career, on building something that's mine. I'm scared, Ethan.
I'm scared that if I let go, if I trust someone else, I might lose everything I've worked for.
Ethan reached out, his fingers gently brushing hers.
I'm not asking you to give up anything, Zoe. I'm asking you to take a chance on something real. Something that doesn't come with rules or expectations. Just us. Just this.
Zoe's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she felt as if the weight of everything she had been holding on to, her career, her fears, her doubts, was slipping away. It wasn't easy. It would never be easy. But with Ethan, she felt like maybe it was worth it. Maybe she was ready to take that leap.
I'm scared too,
she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper.
But maybe it's time to stop being afraid.
Ethan's eyes softened, his thumb grazing the back of her hand.
You don't have to be afraid, Zoe. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere.
As the weeks went on, their relationship deepened. It wasn't without its challenges. Balancing their personal feelings with their professional commitments was no small feat. But the more time they spent together, the more they realized that they weren't just building a business partnership. They were building something much more meaningful. They were building trust. Zoe began to open up more about her dreams, the risks she had taken to get to where she was. She told Ethan about the nights she had spent, exhausted and alone, questioning her decisions. Ethan, in turn, shared the parts of himself he had buried for years, the loneliness, the burden of expectations, the fears of never being enough. They found comfort in each other's vulnerabilities, in the space where they could just be themselves without pretense. Every shared moment, every quiet dinner, every late-night conversation was a step towards something deeper, something neither of them had expected but both of them needed. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of Ethan's penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle below, Ethan turned to Zoe, his expression serious.
I've been thinking about something, he said, his voice hushed in the stillness of the night.
Zoe raised an eyebrow, her heart skipping a beat.
What's that?
Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto hers.
I want this, Zoe.
I want you.
And I'm not going to wait around pretending I don't.
Zoe felt her breath catch, her heart racing. She had known this moment was coming, the moment when everything would come to a head, the moment when they would both have to decide if they were willing to take the leap together. And now, standing here, looking into Ethan's eyes, she realized she didn't need to hesitate anymore.
I want you too,
she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan smiled, a look of relief and warmth spreading across his face. Then let's stop waiting. A few months later, as their relationship continued to grow, the pressure from their professional lives began to ease. Zoe and Ethan had found a way to balance the demands of their careers with the deep connection they shared. Their partnership in business was thriving, but more importantly, their bond as a couple had become the foundation of everything they did. One evening, as they walked through the park near Zoe's apartment, Ethan stopped and turned to face her, his eyes soft and filled with emotion.
Zoe,
he said, his voice trembling slightly. I've spent my whole life thinking I had to do everything on my own. But with you, I realized that love isn't about control. It's about trust. It's about finding someone who makes you better, who pushes you to be more. Zoe smiled, her heart swelling with love for him. You've already made me better, Ethan. I never thought I'd find someone who understood me like you do. Ethan took her hands in his eyes locking onto hers. Then let me show you how much I love you, Zoe. And in that moment, he dropped to one knee, pulling out a small box. The world seemed to pause, the city lights shining around them as he looked up at her, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Zoe Lancaster, he began, his heart on his sleeve. Will you marry me? Zoe's breath caught in her throat, tears welling up in her eyes as she stared at him, the man who had changed her life in ways she hadn't even expected.
Yes,
she whispered, her voice choked with emotion.
Yes.
And as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, they both knew that this was just the beginning. Together they had built something real, something lasting. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The story of Ethan and Zoe was not one of perfect timing or flawless plans. It was messy, complicated, and full of obstacles. But it was also a story of love, trust, and the willingness to take risks for something that was worth fighting for. And as they stood together, ready to face the future, they knew that the most beautiful things in life were often the ones that came when they least expected it. The happily ever after was theirs. And it had started with a single, unexpected spark. The weeks that followed were filled with planning, excitement, and the kind of joy that only comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Ethan and Zoe's lives were forever changed by love, by risk, and by the deep connection they had found with each other. They had built something real, something unbreakable, and as they stepped into the future, hand in hand, they knew one thing for sure: the best was yet to come. If you believe that love is worth the risk, hit subscribe and like this video, because only those who truly believe in love will understand what Ethan and Zoe found. Don't let the naysayers keep you from chasing what's real. Comment below with "I believe in second chances" if you think that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the best endings. Let's keep this story going, because love, trust, and a leap of faith are just the beginning.